Remember the days of final exams? Remember how much stress was involved in that? How the all night cramming sessions would take place, and you probably would take in copious amounts of caffeine in order to get through it all. What we had in our school was finals week, and it was that week where so much of our grade depended on what we did on those pieces of paper. It was absolutely ridiculous. And to make matters worse, I was a terrible student, and learning disabilities are really no joke. The day that I graduated from high school was a total horror show. I remember walking down the aisle and I shook the principal's hand. I took my diploma, I went and sat down and I opened it up, but there was no diploma in there. There was literally a note in the diploma holder that told me that I had to come back the following weeks and take more tests. It was humiliating because I was the oldest one in the whole family. Like, out of my brothers and my cousins, I was the first one to graduate in that generation, and yet there I was without a diploma. Now, needless to say, that was a humiliating experience. But at the end of this video, I want to tell you how God used that point to actually shape the rest of my life. My name is JD Goding, and this is Understanding the Bible. And I want to first say thank you to you for even clicking on this video. It really means a lot. But the reason that I started this channel was to take small amounts of text and simply mine the gold out of it. And the purpose in doing that is so that your relationship with Jesus Christ would only deepen. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. It just helps get the message out further. So this story begins with the test for the disciples. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" This seems to be an interesting question for the disciples since we're like halfway through the book, but yet here we are, right? Jesus has been working really hard. He's been doing miracles. He's been walking very long distances. He's been doing multiplications of food. He's been healing the sick. He's been casting out demons. He's been preaching the gospel. It's been a full-on story up to this point, but yet right here, Jesus is going to give the disciples an impromptu test. Now, to set the stage, Jesus' home base is in Capernaum, and they're going to this place called Caesarea Philippi, which is about 60 miles away, depending on where they would start from. So if you can imagine 20 miles a day walking, there is a lot of time for the disciples to sit and think. I think they would have been processing among themselves all that had happened up to that point. I mean, they have seen Jesus heal the sick. They've seen Jesus do mass food production. They've seen Jesus literally stand up in a boat and tell the wind and the waves to settle down, and they listen. And they've also just recently been massively chewed out. Now, this story is a bit of a mouthful to explain, and I did a video on it a couple days ago. I'll leave the link in the description below. But the disciples were worried about the wrong thing, and Jesus literally got frustrated with them and chewed them out. And I think this 3-day journey or 4-day journey that they're on, the 60 miles that they have to cover, there's a lot of very deep introspection that's going on and probably internal questions that they're having, because it's one thing to get chewed out by like your friend or a family member, but when you're getting chewed out by God in a boat all by yourself, there's no room to hide. So I think this had a profound effect on the disciples themselves. And then as they're walking, Jesus hits them with this question: "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." This is a really interesting question for Jesus to ask, because it's not, what do people think about my ability to forgive sin, or what do you think about me being Lord of the Sabbath? You know, things that Jesus has claimed. It's, who do people say that I am? Now, we also have to remember that Jesus's fame has gone far and wide. Like, his fame has reached literally the top of the palace. In fact, King Herod had executed Jesus's cousin John the Baptist, and when he's hearing about all these miracles that Jesus is doing, King Herod actually believes that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead and has come back and is doing these miracles, and he's really just scared to death. And when you look at the opinions of others, they're saying it's Elijah or it's one of the prophets. It's like these other people have no clue who Jesus is. And Jesus is going to make a really strong point here in the next verse. And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." Now, it seems like that strong rebuke that happened back in 8:21 is really taking effect, because he asks what other people think of who Jesus is, and then he asks the disciples, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter answers, "You're the Christ." And that word Christ means the anointed one or the Messiah. So it's like Jesus gives them this test and they pass it. Now, this is a very personal question that every person has to answer today. And the question is not, what do you think about Jesus, or what do you think about church? In reality, those type of questions lead you absolutely nowhere. In fact, these are the kind of questions where so much oxygen is wasted, because at the end of the day, when you boil it all down, it's actually meaningless to a person's eternity. But the question, who do you say that I am, or to us, us, who do we say Jesus is? That's the question that cuts through all the noise, and that question is very confronting. The answer to that question is either yes, Jesus is Lord, and in that case, there's a major shift that happens in a person's life, or the answer is no, Jesus is just some great guy, or he's a prophet, or he's, some other mythical creature, and then that person stays in the state of being an unbeliever. But what's encouraging about this verse from the disciples' point of view is Jesus is making a distinction between the disciples and everybody else. You see, the disciples get it now that Jesus is the Messiah, where everybody else thinks that Jesus is somebody else completely. They were the ones that were seeing Jesus in the correct light. Everyone else is thinking he's Elijah, he's John the Baptist, raised from the dead, or he's one of the prophets. It's like the disciples were given their final exams and they just passed them with flying colors. But then there's a verse that happens and it's like, where is this coming from? And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. Now, if you're asking yourself, why in the world would Jesus say that to guys who are confessing that he's the Messiah? Like, if you're wondering that question, I 100% understand. It seems counterproductive, right? It's like the disciples now literally have eternal life in the palm of their hand, and all they would have to do is go out and share it, but yet Jesus tells them to shut up and sit down about it. So you have to ask the question, why does he do that? Now, from a Jewish point of view, the Messiah, who they're claiming Jesus to be, would come in and conquer Rome, meaning they'd kick Rome out of Israel. Israel would regain the status that they had under the days of King Solomon and King David, where money and blessing was absolutely everywhere. But you see, that's not what Jesus came to do. The Jewish people were actually thinking too small. The Jewish people were thinking nationalistically, and Jesus is thinking globally in the way that he's going to take care of the problem of sin in general. You see, the reason that the Messiah had to come was because he was the only one that could pay the debt of sin, and this was the thing that was a mystery to everybody. While most of the Jewish people were thinking nationalistically, Jesus wasn't. And the thing is that like physical wealth, political power, and status in life are actually not what the Christian signs up for. And the reason why Jesus basically tells the disciples to shut up and sit down is because they don't understand that Jesus literally has to go to the cross, be crucified, die, and then be raised on the third day in order for this to be complete. They don't have that knowledge yet. And because they don't have that knowledge, Jesus doesn't want them to say a word because their understanding, while good at this point, it's not complete. And this is a very big deal because now they understand Jesus' message more than everybody else. And you see, very soon they're going to be responsible for taking the complete message that they're in the middle of learning right now to the ends of the earth. You see, I remember sitting there with the rest of my student body looking at that piece of paper saying that I needed to come back and take more tests, and I felt like an utter failure. But that event in my life turned me into the direction of joining the United States Marine Corps. And after a whole bunch of different God stories, I ended up leaving the United States Marine Corps after my contract was up. And I joined an organization called Youth with a Mission, or YWAM for short. And you know what? Jesus met me there because it was school. And I hated school because I was the one with a learning disability. But Jesus gave me the ability and the desire to actually read the Bible and study it for myself. And it completely changed my life. After a couple of years of training, I was given the opportunity to teach the Bible. And literally, that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. Yes, it was a strong blow to the ego to have to sit there on graduation day and receive like my not diploma, but it didn't stop God from getting me on course to become the teacher that he's made me to be. So here's my encouragement for you. I know that you've had setbacks in your life and you've probably been at places where you've stalled out. You might even be stalled out right now. Believe me, I can relate with that. And the truth is that God is not done with us even after we fail miserably. In fact, God will work through us in spite of ourselves. This means that God knew every single sin, failure, and problem you would ever encounter, and he's still reaching out to you with a hopeful future. The disciples are great examples of this. 12 clueless, prideful men all together with Jesus, spending time with Jesus, to the point where now 8 chapters into the Gospel of Mark, they finally say, Jesus, you're the Christ. And it's not very much further in the story when the Holy Spirit is going to commission these men to go out into the world to preach the gospel literally to the ends of the earth. Now, if this is something you're hearing for the first time and you're like, JD, I am not following what you're saying, I got you. I don't want you to leave empty-handed, so this is what I want you to do. Find yourself a Bible or open up a Bible app. Turn to the Gospel of Mark and read it. It'll take you less than an hour because it's only 16 chapters in total. In doing that, it's going to help you understand Jesus in a new light. And I can promise you this, if you take me up on this offer, Jesus is going to be speaking to you. Thanks, and I hope this helps.